recording. I have it set up on through mine to automatically record. So
Okay. Well, I just happened to notice that, and I didn't want us to get, like 30 minutes in and suddenly realize, oh.
thank you for remembering that.
Well, so let me backtrack a little bit just for Robin's sake, since she'll be watching us. But I really do think sometimes, we have to take into account students' expectations or students' interpretation of the advice we give are oftentimes different from what we've actually said to do or made suggestions. I mean, I don't think any of us are like ordering them to make certain changes. I use terms like, I would strongly encourage, or I would highly recommend. But I thought, given that, I am getting a few students with concerns, and it wasn't, with one class and one professor, it was, across a couple of different classes and a few different professors. I think it might help because we've really not, especially working in the virtual environment, really not had an opportunity to kind of come together and look at what we're doing and actually look at something concrete. So this isn't by any means, like a punitive measure where you're, being forced to attend the training, and please mark this on your timesheets, as time spent on the job. And it's really just to make sure that we're giving the students the best advice that we possibly can.
And I think one thing, kind of adding on to what you said, Mike, I think it's, and I know, Marissa, this was probably part of your training as a teacher. And I also think it's just sort of like in our nature as tutors. What I was always taught was that you find something positive to say, right? Like you find something in the writing. Sometimes this is easier than other times, that you say, you're doing a really, really good job with this, or I really like the way that you've done this. And like Mike said, sometimes they kind of latch on to that part and ignore the rest of it. So being able to find something positive to say so that the student feels encouraged and doesn't feel like they're just like, well, this whole thing is awful and I'm a terrible writer. Balancing that with those, I strongly suggest that you do this, or I really feel like this is missing, or things like that. And I had sent out these 3 different sample essays, and Mike thought we might look at them kind of in the kind of order that they'll often come in, which is narrative and then argumentative, and then for the comp 2, the analysis. And one thing I want to say about narrative, and narratives can be difficult to respond to because students are often writing about something that is deeply meaningful to them, or oftentimes students love to write about tragedy. As we all know, they like to write about something that was really tragic in their lives. And so from my experience, students sometimes feel like if you're giving them kind of constructive criticism, it feels very personal because you are responding to a piece of writing that is personal to them. So I think that it's important to, with these balance, giving me meaningful feedback, while also affirming whatever experience that they are writing about. I find that often, and I've been reading a lot of narratives from Cumberland County this semester. I don't actually assign a narrative in my comp classes, but I've been reading a lot of narratives from Cumberland County. And I think one of the big things, I mean, I could have probably written this across every single one, was, and Mike kind of phrased it like this earlier. So obviously this is something significant to you. You wouldn't write about it if it wasn't significant to you, but you're not explaining to the reader what about this is particularly significant. So I did a workshop on narrative for Wartburg Central High School on Friday. And two of the things that I told them was, you know, in terms of like the narrative genre, some of the characteristics are vivid detail. That's something we look for, but then also some indication of the significance. Why is this meaningful? What should we take from this? And I often talk to students about that being the thesis. The thesis is going to be the significance of the paper. Did you guys have any thoughts about this narrative that I sent out? And I want to say I found I just kind of went back a couple of semesters and found ones that none of you guys had responded to, and just sort of pulled a couple from a few different kind of types of writing. So this narrative was don't run stop signs. That's good advice. I guess that's significant. What kind of feedback would you give this paper? Rose, you're muted.
I'm looking at the paper on my phone. I just don't want you guys to think I'm looking at something else.
I would
on my
never
phone
think that,
while
Rose.
you're while we're all looking at the thing.
Let me just start by saying I was happy I didn't have to respond to this one.
My first thought is that this is, I mean, kind of hard to tell because like on my phone, it's just, well, you can't see it, but on my phone, I'm like, oh my God, it's so long. I mean, I don't like, one of the issues I have is I don't really know what the student is supposed to do. So to me, it seems too long, but maybe that's actually how long the teacher wants it to be. And that's not, and if that is the length it's supposed to be, then it's a totally different issue.
I think that's a good point, Rose. I think, and I didn't find many that had assignment sheets. So I was kind of going off of, in my mind, I should have probably included this in the email, but what typically is asked, and I do think this is far longer than a lot of the narratives that instructors ask for. One of the things that I probably would include here is vivid detail and description's really good, but you want to pick and choose what it is that what details you're including, what description, what you're describing. And it felt like there were a lot of irrelevant details to me in here, which just added to this idea of the paper just going on and on and on. It did feel very long, and I think maybe that was a result of just so maybe Rose, you would possibly go through and say things like, here are some places where I feel like you're giving unnecessary detail. Here are some places where you could make the detail more vivid. That's kind of what I'm picking up from you. But yeah, that was one of my reactions too.
I think too, also, it's not necessarily too long, but if the length is what it's supposed to be, then it's unfocused. And like, that's basically what you were saying, but something I've done with students recently mostly when I've had in person or video appointments is I'm like, well, you make a lot of good points in this paragraph, but you should put a topic sentence at the beginning that gives like a general idea of what the points are about
Yes.
in the paragraph.
Yes. Like, why are you including these details? If you tell us why, that's going to make a whole lot more sense than just a jumble of different kind of points and details. Like if we know what the significance is from the outset of that paragraph, just sort of like a mini thesis for that paragraph. Yeah, a lot of times that can be a great fix. And if I had a dime for every time I said add a topic sentence here so that we know what the significance of this is, I would be a rich woman. I would be rolling in dough. What other thoughts did you guys have about this?
This kind of adds on to the same thing, but I felt like there was a lot of backstory, like almost too much before it got to the actual point. And then when it got to the point, it was so rushed and there was just so much detail there that it was kind of hard to understand for her to tie it back into what she actually wanted to talk about in her paper, which I guess was how you're not promised tomorrow. So
yeah, I think that's for sure. There was a lot of backstory that seemed kind of irrelevant, so that the meat of the story was rushed. And speaking of the point of the story, so very short intro and kind of chock full of cliches. Live every day like it's your last. You're not promised tomorrow, so make the best of your days because your life is I'm pretty sure my grandmother had that like in like a stitch point and hanging in her bathroom. And I tell my students in my classes, if it's something that's stitched onto a pillow at your grandparents' house, don't put it in your paper. That's a good indication that this is a cliche. So I would probably ask him or her, whoever the student is. I think we find out it's a female student writer, to sort of kind of reimagine that, expand on that introductory paragraph, give us some context, and find another way to say live every day like it's your last, and not kind of revert to those sort of cliched phrases. For me as a reader, that's my biggest pet peeve, is cliches that are kind of become meaningless at some point.
I do worry about telling students, I mean, I understand the importance of avoiding cliches, but I also worry sometimes for them, it may really not be a cliche. They may simply not have heard this.
That's true.
We have. So I might approach it to just say again, okay, you're right about this, but we probably all know this on some level, but as you were saying, think about something very specific you learned from this. And I agree with what Mendlin was about the pacing of it. And I found it very hard to follow after a point because the details of how the accident occurred, I'm still not sure. And then the backstory with the writer and her father, and where's the anger coming from? And I wanted to know more about that. And I never quite got any of that, an explanation for any of that. And so I think I would be, indicating, here I am as a reader, and you're not giving me what I want out of a story for it to be satisfying. That's sometimes hard, I think, especially in the virtual world, to get across to a student without seeming really harsh. I'm an embedded tutor for a Comp 1 class, and as it turns out, a couple of students in my own class were friends with someone in that class who had been complaining about me. That Mike Hill, he's awful. He told me this paper didn't, fulfill the assignment at all. And they brought this up in class. And I thought, okay, what an odd thing to do to rat your friend out in class. But I actually went back later and looked at it, and yes, that's how I had led off with, okay, thanks for sending this in, but this does not fulfill the assignment that your instructor has specified. So here's what you would need to do. And I said, to my 2 students the next time I saw them, please tell your friend that next time I'm just going to say, yee-haw, what a great paper. And I'm just going to just stand back and realize there's not a trampoline under her when she makes it dive off the high dive. But, she wants she wants affirmation. So that's what I'm going to give her. But it did make me realize that, okay, maybe I do need to be a little less direct or a little less blunt in terms of saying I am the reader. But I think here, it would be easy enough to just say, okay, like Rose was saying, why is this detail here? Because I'm looking at thinking, okay, do I need to know that Abby worked at Dick's Last Resort on the island in Dixon Forge? And honestly, they had such a blast. And I'm thinking, okay, but that has nothing to do with you, the accident, your father. And I might just say, okay, tell me how this connects. Explain this to me, because I don't understand. I'm having difficulty putting this together. And maybe, that would be one approach, especially to a narrative, and it being the very first assignment sometimes, to just complete ignorance and say, okay, walk me through this. I think it might get the writer involved a little more.
One thing, and this may be too directive, but sometimes when I have a paper where there is just so much excess detail that seems irrelevant, I will say, okay, I'm going to highlight all of the places where I feel like I don't understand where this fits into the story. And, I want you to read through that and think about how you can, if it is relevant and if you can connect it back. And something you said, Mike, it made me think of significance. It's like we have all this detail, and then all of a sudden we get to the crash and it's like very fuzzy and we don't know a lot about it. If that's how she experienced it, you might say, well, maybe this is how you experienced it. It was a blur. Maybe that has something to do with the significance of the story, is that you remember all the details surrounding it, but the actual event itself was kind of, not, I don't know. So that's one thing that I might include here. Do you guys have any other ideas here about how you might approach this? I think we've covered a lot of the big stuff.
I do want to know why someone would, offer you a hot rag for your head. I thought that was just the most bizarre thing ever. I was thinking maybe a cool rag, yes, but a hot one.
I want to know which bone it was. I want to know which bone she broke.
Yeah, it was one in her leg, right?
But I thought of you, Rose, when I was reading this, because I was thinking Rose would have done so much better job at telling the story.
The detail I'm wondering about is it the same bone that I broke? But actually what I was gonna say is I noticed quite a few grammar or punctuation style things, and I pretty much always point those out And I sometimes wonder if I'm being too nitpicky, like you need a comma here, you need a comma here, you need a comma here, you need a comma here. But I mean, each thing that's wrong is a separate thing that's wrong. But actually, so then the other thing is, like, I wonder, like, if I were replying to this assignment, I would wonder if I should point those things out, or if it would be better to focus on content instead of mechanics.
So here's what I would say about that. If, and we also often don't have the luxury of knowing when an assignment is due. But if a student does turn in an assignment sheet that has a due date on it, and I can see, oh, the student does have time to resubmit, I don't, unless it's a matter of I cannot understand what the student is saying, I make a note saying there are some editing issues here, but I would like you to, I think that there are also some significant revisions that need to be made, some of the bigger stuff. So I don't really want you to focus on that yet. I want you to focus on some of the bigger things, and then we can come back and meet and talk about the smaller stuff. If you don't know, I think it's really important, and it's easy to get when you're in this asynchronous environment where you're not talking to the student. It's so easy for that editor and us to come out and want to mark everything. I think the problem with that is that, one, I don't think the student learns anything from that. So if our goal is to make a student a more independent writer, a more independent editor, a more independent, evaluator of their own work, I don't think that pointing out everything helps them very much. It's overwhelming. They just make the changes probably without really thinking about it.
Mhm.
So what I do is I look for one or two patterns. So maybe it's sentence fragments, maybe it's misplaced commas, whatever it is, I point to a couple of patterns of error, and that's what I focus on. Our goal is not to send them off with a perfectly polished paper. That's, just not possible. And if we have the luxury of time, we can say, come back, let's look at some of these other things. But, we aren't editors, we aren't proofreaders. If we can focus on one or two things, then that gives us the opportunity to kind of model for them and also explain to them why the way that they're doing it doesn't kind of follow traditional grammar, syntax, punctuation rules, and then help them to kind of maybe learn how to do that in future papers. And then the next paper, if they submit it, maybe they're doing better with sentence fragments, so we can move on to the next thing. Would you agree, Mike?
I think that really helps to kind of do some scaffolding, because whether or not, like, cause I worry sometimes, if after a point they stop reading, if we put too much commentary in, if they actually do stop reading, or if we put too much emphasis on the punctuation, and also put in all those remarks about content, if they're going to be overwhelmed. At the same time, that, yeah, if we had them in class, we would definitely want to address it. So I think, like, if we could make a note that just says, if you have time, please schedule an appointment, a virtual appointment, or send another draft in, and let's focus on some of these, editing issues. Or say in the comments, I also noticed that you seem to be having some difficulty with commas, so you might want to, have another look at the section of the handbook. Sometimes I'll do like a little thing in as a comment, to say something like, adding some commas will improve the flow of this sentence, compare, and then I'll rewrite it and, try to give them one or two examples, and hope that doesn't, even though I always refer them to the handbook, I also realize that's not always going to happen, and it's not always going to be helpful. They may or may not have the handbook. And even if they do, they may or may not open it up and actually read that section. But if I can give an example, then they can see, oh, okay, yeah, that does change the flow of this, or it improves understanding. And I noticed a student, for instance, had a fondness for the phrase "at the time." I don't know how often that came up, but I did start laughing at one point when she said "my dad" at the time. And I thought, okay, what happened there?
Like a drinking game.
And so, I think probably were I reading this, I might say, repeating this phrase several times, and it wouldn't matter, except here it becomes almost comical because it sounds like, you suddenly switch dads and you don't indicate that happened. It's just, and my dad at the time, and he was really upset, but we patched that up and then he moved on.
And I found a new dad who wasn't so critical of my tardiness.
And my choice of friends and all of that. So.
Do you guys want to look at the argumentative essay, which, is yeah, something. Mike, you talk about not being glad you didn't have to respond to that first one. This one for me was, I'm not one of those teachers who says you can't write about, but there are certain topics. I have never, like, strangely enough, had anyone write a paper, like an anti-death penalty paper, which is interesting to me. But I've gotten, probably over the course of my teaching career, 50 to 60 pro death penalty cases or whatever. And they tend to become very passionate, and maybe a little, one of the word that came to me, the phrase that came to me when I was reading this was just inflammatory language. It was just like, and it made me want to find this student and send them a link to the, like, Innocence Project or something, or a copy of one of the, so many books that I've read. But anyway, so this is an argumentative essay, sort of like, what we're going to be seeing a lot of for the remainder of the semester, where the students have to pick a topic, craft an argument about it, bring in secondary resources to either back up their point of view or as a counter argument that they can kind of pick apart. What were some of your initial thoughts about this paper?
I thought that it was pretty unorganized for an argumentative paper. I didn't know what a lot of the paragraphs, the point was. It felt like just a history of the death penalty almost. So I would have liked to see, like, more facts and then being backed up.
Yes, I totally agree, Mendelin. It was, and I think that it even went beyond the point of, if you add a topic sentence so that we can see the relevance here, even within the paragraphs, there were so many things where I was like, how, I don't see any way that you could possibly make sure that these things go together. Organization was a huge, I think, point here. And I think that this would be a paper that it would work much better if you were sitting with a student so that you could sort of, I don't know, even take a pair of scissors and cut it up and make piles of what goes where, or use highlighters or something, because it was very disorganized. Oh, balloon. I'm so glad that wasn't a red balloon. We had to go to an it themed house on our trick-or-treating route, and I've been having clown. They were giving out red balloons, and I've been having clown dreams ever since. So if you've got any red balloons over there, Mendelin, please make sure they don't float up behind you. Anyway, that was a side note.
Oh, sorry.
No, go ahead. Go ahead, Marissa.
Yeah, this paper, I think they have a clear position. It just does not come through at all. And I was gonna kind of just piggyback off of what Mendelin was saying and what you were also saying, Jenny. Yeah, they really need to work backwards with this. And I think this would be a paper that you would need to talk with the student one-on-one, because I think they need to deconstruct a lot of their major claims, figure out what they actually want to say. And so there were a couple of paragraphs that I honestly had no idea what was going on or how that connected back. So I think this would be a situation probably where you would have to figure out, like, what do you actually want to say? How can we deconstruct these paragraphs and figure out what your topic is for each and how that connects back to your kind of sort of thesis that exists.
I like that. Yeah, almost like maybe do a reverse outline, and that would maybe show the students, hey, it's hard to tell how this moves from kind of it needs to progress. And one thing I always tell students is, students have it in their mind, my conclusion should restate my thesis. But one of the things that I add on to that for students is that your thesis should have kind of progressed. So when you restate it in your conclusion, there should be more to it than there was when you started. And it's like, I have no idea where we end up here, or how we got there. So maybe like doing some kind of reverse outline, or, because I think you're right, Marissa, it's very hard to tell even what exactly is going on in here. I think, did you guys notice anything about research? I think the research was a little bit unclear.
I think there were a couple instances where there were textual citations back to back, and I wasn't sure what was actually being cited or anything like that.
Yeah, I think that there were some issues with clarity of what was a quotation and what wasn't. And then, there'd be this huge, like, bulk of information, and then there would be like a couple of sentences at the bottom that would have citations after them, but I would be kind of like, where did all the rest of this come from? Like, it was just, they seemed spotty. There wasn't a lot of consistency in citations. I also, and I think this is one of my pet peeves here. I keep talking about my pet peeves. Sorry, guys. That this is, a lot of this is a moral argument. And I know that most instructors don't want you to make a moral argument. This is very, very loaded with kind of judgment. There is zero objectivity here. And, I'm not saying that there can't be some subjectivity. You're going to be making an argument. And obviously that's going to be how you feel, what your opinion is. But you know, it feels very judgmental without those kind of factual resources being brought in to back up the way that the student is approaching it. I guess it's that was a big, that would be a big part of what I would probably say to a student is, you know.
That was a big part of what I noticed too. And I guess, again, I don't like, maybe I'm too open-minded in a sense, but since I don't know what the since I don't know what the assignment requirements are, like I have a social science background. So I don't, you know, like I'm very pragmatic. If I were writing this paper, I would ask myself, well, what actually reduces crime? What actually, you know, what actually makes the world a better place? I guess.
Yeah.
And to be honest, I am surprised at how effective some of this person's arguments are, but they are rhetorical arguments. They're not based on any type of evidence. So, like, if the assignment is make a convincing argument, it doesn't matter if you use facts or not. Like, this person actually did a good job aside from the organization issues, but I don't know. That's just
What
how I'm looking at it.
That's interesting, Rose, because when I introduce the argumentative essay, there is, in terms of genre, a difference between a persuasive essay and an argumentative essay. Both, you know, a persuasive essay is argumentative and an argumentative essay should be persuasive. But this is to me more of a persuasive essay because it is very much based on kind of a moral, like moral argument. It's not backed up with facts that are necessarily, well, one, relevant, but two, what I would consider credible, and they're not putting themselves into a conversation with these that really there's no, I don't think, much meat there. So I do think that that's an issue, but I really like what you said about kind of from your social science background. I think that's a really good way to respond. You could even say, this is my background. As a reader, this is how I kind of interpret it. If this was what you were asked to do, okay, but that's not what you're being asked to do. You're being asked to write an argumentative essay that is incredibly logical, that is heavily supported by credible secondary sources that you are bringing in and really interacting with. So I think that's a really good point. And you know, Mike talks a lot about responding as a reader, and I include that in almost every paper I respond to, you know, online, is as a reader, this is my reaction, or as a reader, this seems to be what you're saying. And that, you know, again, puts you in, you don't have to be an evaluator, which is wonderful. You are a reader and you can say, you know, think of me as the audience you're trying to reach. As an audience member, this is my reaction. So Rose, I love that. I think that's really,
Thanks.
I think that's really helpful. Any other thoughts? This is a hard essay to tutor. There's a lot going on here. And I find that the farther we get in the semester, the more time it takes to kind of respond to some of these papers, because they do tend to get a bit more complex with more research and things like that. Were you gonna say something, Michael?
Yeah, I was just thinking, I mean, you pretty much said what I had in mind, that I'm, realizing more and more, as we move toward the end of the semester, these will be the papers that are the high stakes essays for a lot of classes. There'll also be ones that, especially depending on how much latitude the students had with choosing a topic, they'll be the ones the students feel most passionate about, which can be both a blessing and a curse. Because I have a feeling the student feels very, very passionate about his or her stance on the death penalty. That doesn't translate necessarily to not just, a convincing paper, but even one you can clearly follow. Because what Marissa was saying about, trying to figure out exactly where a citation starts and another one ends is not always easy. And I also noticed that it looks like at one point the student is not even quoting the author that it's given credit for, but is quoting the little introduction or the head note introducing that article. And so that really does take away from the credibility of the author, and that's maybe what I would be approaching it as, and just be saying, okay, regardless of how one feels about capital punishment, you've got to think about your credibility as the author and as the person proposing the solution. So if you have errors like that, which could be easy to fix, you're losing some ground with your readers. But I know that's a kind of retread of what we're already saying, but yeah, that's just what was going through my head. The sentence that stands out for me in this one is, those are the people you want dead, the greedy and determined. I thought, yep, those determined people just make it so hard for the rest of us.
Oh man, those determined people. Oh.
And then I get to sitting there thinking, okay, what exactly did the person mean? Because I can't quite wrap my head around it. And
Well, the greedy and the determined is the wife who wants to kill her husband for his insurance money. And she's greedy because of that. And she's determined because she plans and plans and plans, and she follows through with that plan.
so now I've got it. Now I just had to have an intermediary explain it to me. I had the greed down, but
Yeah.
I think this person could write a Western called The Greedy and the Determined.
All of the bold and the beautiful.
I think this person has a real future writing for like 48 hours or something. Like, I think maybe that should be part of your comment too, is have you thought about like going into some kind of true crime journalism? Because man, you got it. And I know, because I consume a lot of true crime journalism. So so the last paper, and I will admit to you guys that I not only I not only despise poetry, I also despise William Shakespeare, and reading about poetry and William Shakespeare. So but I did think that there were some interesting things going on in this paper. So from what I got, from just the description, there was an assignment sheet with this one, but it was just poetry analysis is what I got from it. So they were just supposed to choose a poem and analyze it, kind of focusing on specific kind of literary conventions. So any thoughts about this one? Besides the fact that, you know, who wants to read about William Shakespeare besides Mike?
The biggest thing that, oh, sorry.
Oh, I'm sorry. I drank too much coffee before the meeting. I'll be right back.
Okay. See, Mike, that's a much less rude way of saying that you need to go to the restroom than I do.
I've become so accustomed to dealing with Jenny and the things that come out of her mouth. Absolutely nothing surprises me at this point.
Yeah.
I did. I mean, I think far and away, this is probably the best of the 3 essays. It's organized, it is coherent.
I don't know about organization. I think there's some organizational issues.
But comparatively speaking, I thought, I thought it worked much better. But and this is something I find difficult to talk to students about without making them upset or making them feel devalued. I got the feeling that, if the student in this case would write more like he or she speaks, it would be a much more fluid essay. I got the sense that there was some attempt at academic language, so-called academic language, that kind of just ended up cluttering the paper and kind of getting in the way of my always following the point.
Yeah, I agree. What were you going to say, Mendelin?
Well, as I read through it, I think the sources aren't, and I don't know, I had a lot of teachers that said absolutely do not use anything that's just a summary that you find online. So I was thinking, I don't know how to say it to explain it like to them, because I'm sure that it was a good source and they found a lot of great information from it, but I don't know, maybe something from the library or.
Yeah, I think the sources are potentially problematic. The lit charts, and there's an actual just like poem analysis, which it would be interesting. We're looking for, we're not typically, when you assign an analysis, you don't want students to go out and find another analysis and incorporate that, something that's just a straight up poetry analysis. Typically you're wanting them to find some secondary sources that have some kind of specific angle in analyzing the poem. So that's definitely something that I would point out, because I would say that'd be a pretty significant kind of component of what the instructor would be looking for, is the sources they're using and how they're using them, because it doesn't really bring anything to this assignment for sure. Trying to look at my notes. This was the one that just kind of went in one eye and out the other. I thought that for me, in terms of like thesis, main argument, it didn't maybe the writer isn't taking it as far as I would like them to. Shakespeare creatively and thoughtfully expresses in a much different way his thoughts on the perfect imperfection of true love and its beauty hidden in plain sight. Maybe I would like to hear, and again, like Mike said, I think this is the most well-written and best developed of them. But I would like to see maybe them take that a step further and tell us what sort of Shakespeare is saying about beauty there. I think we kind of get to it as you read, but maybe early on, and then sort of structure the paper around that. That was one of the things that kind of popped out to me. And then one of the other things was the writer is referring to certain things in the poem, but not bringing in a lot of actual quotes as examples. So bringing in some specific textual evidence. I think I tend to be an over commenter. I'm surprised that I don't get some of the complaints that Mike does about, and I also tend to have to really tone down my bluntness. Filtering myself isn't one of my greatest strengths. But I often will find that I've left so many comments and suggestions that those little comment boxes start collapsing because there's not room for them. And that's when I know that and it's not grammar stuff, or punctuation stuff. It's the bigger stuff. So I think it's a balance. We have to find a balance between giving way too much feedback in terms of, because the student can only just as a writer, and I'm the same way, process so much in terms of what needs to be revised here, what needs to be rethought. So I think but I also think that we need to make sure that we're giving them really specific, substantial kind of suggestions that they can directly kind of incorporate into their paper. So I think it's that balance between the two, which is hard. For some of it's hard to not over comment. For some of it's hard for us to make sure we're commenting enough because we don't want to overwhelm. But I think striking that balance is important.
I will say, oh, sorry.
No, I was just going to ask if you guys had any thoughts about that.
I'll tell you something I do that I feel like is a good approach, and I hope I'm right that it is. So, and I usually do this in papers where the student is like pretty low level in terms of their skills. Like pretty much what I like, and I'm not an expert on, like this type of writing is this level and this type of writing is this level. But if I look at a student's writing and I think, oh, this must be a remedial student, that's usually when I do this. But I often say there are other ways you can improve your paper, but these but the ones I have pointed out are the ones you should focus on first.
That's a really good way to frame that.
cool.
I like that.
Yeah, I like the idea of kind of prioritizing the concerns and going with the higher order concerns as the thing to take care of, the most urgently. But and like you were saying about when you're reading it and that you realize so many errors that you think, okay, this has to be a student and learning support. Sometimes I just will make the comment that there are so many errors that your reader will be distracted by those and not be able to focus on the content. So I might even flip that and make just grammar and punctuation maybe a higher level concern if I feel like it's to the point where it does interfere with communication. Try to almost sell it to the student that way. You want your voice heard, so let's see what we can do to get rid of the interference. I used to find comparing it, to a car radio would work, but you can't really do that anymore because everyone has satellites. So
I don't.
well, but you don't.
I have podcasts, Mike.
That's true. That's true. I'll refrain. I'll mute myself before I start talking badly about 3.
Well, does anybody have any final thoughts or suggestions, or I don't know, besides about my podcast choices, Michael? Those are unwelcome.
You guys might have talked about this when I was out of the room, but I always get hung up on students using first person pronouns. I'm like, oh my God, like, don't you know you're not supposed to do that? Why didn't your teacher tell you?
Your teacher probably did
your
tell
teacher
you.
tell you? I don't know. So is that something you guys already talked about in the poem essay? Because like, I think it's good that people can, as in they have the ability to express their personal opinions, but that's not that, like, whether or not you like something is not what the essay is about.
And I think it depends on what the assignment is. So my students can use first person in everything except for their analysis essay. That's the only essay that they don't use first person. They use first person in their argumentative essay because they write it in the form of a letter. So I think it's if there's no assignment sheet included with those kinds of rules, it's hard to know. So what I tell students is, and I do this for first and second person, I say most instructors for academic writing discourage the use of I, or in the case of second person, of you, or speaking directly to your audience. You might double check with your instructor and ask if this is okay, but I would assume it's something you probably don't need. And I also show students, because so much of that first person is I think, I believe. We know you're writing it, so we know you think and you believe it. And it's so easy to get rid of that because you just take off the I think, I believe. It's still a complete sentence. I think that the death penalty is a dangerous practice because many innocent people might get put to death. Okay, well, then take off the I think and just say the death penalty is a dangerous practice because many innocent people might get put to death. So it's, if you show students, and I tell students when I'm working with them early in a process, do it that way, write it that way. And then as you're editing, just take it out. Because for some students, it's easier for them to kind of get the ball rolling if they are including that first person so just kind of get them and maybe say, you know, I know this might be easier for you to do as you're drafting, but just make sure you know, or double check with your instructor. Cause I run into the same thing too, Rose. But for me, second person is the really big thing I run into. And I'm like, stop talking to me. I'm your reader, but don't talk to me. It's not. So I don't really say it like that. But.
Well, I usually couch it in terms of most instructors feel this would be too informal, so you might want to play it safe and use third person only. Because I always think, okay, I could say, yeah, you could go in your instructor ask, but I also know from experience that's not likely to happen, and the instructor has probably already said in class or on the assignment, you know, what voice to use. But when I talk about, you know, playing it safe and hedging your bets and that sort of thing, that I think maybe they respond a little better because it's less criticism of them and more about, let's see if we can get you the best grade possible. And that they tend to perk up because they're determined people. And I don't want them to put to death for that. So.
No, Mike, the determined ones are the ones that should be. The greedy ones who want the A's and who are determined to get them. Well, I think this has been a really good discussion, and I think it's nice to touch base kind of in the semester, during the semester. I wish we'd done it earlier, and I like seeing all of your smiling faces and hearing your ideas and the ways that you guys approach these things. And you know, I hear lots from Mike. Mike and I exchange ideas all the time. To the point of, you know.
Yeah, that's probably ends well. That's why it's silence. But while I do have you all together, if you want to work the Thanksgiving weekend in the LCO, you're welcome to. It would be purely voluntary, but just, you know, think about it and let us know. And, you know, I don't. Traffic will be heavy, but you never know. But yeah, just, you know, think about it maybe this week and drop one of us a line.
I'm going to send an email out too, so I'll include you guys on that. All right.
Thank you all for taking time out of your day to spend with us.
It was a pleasure. Pleasure.
It's great to get so many of my questions answered, and it's great to see everybody.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Aw. I just realized you have a cat, Marissa.
I did too.
She usually just sits back there and hangs out. So
what's her name?
Rory.
Are you a Gilmore Girls fan?
I am.
Oh my gosh, Marissa, we are soulmates. Me too. Do you think 7 years old is too young?
Yeah, it is far too young.
No.
You've never seen an episode of Gilmore Girls, Michael.
I know, but I'm just, you know, devil's advocate and all.
I know the later episodes can get a little racy, and there's a lot of illusions that she's not going to get at 7, but I just feel like
I think the early seasons are fine.
I do too. You know what? That's what we're doing this coming weekend. She's getting her first COVID vaccine. I'm getting my booster, and we're going to just lay around and watch Gilmore Girls. Mike, you're invited.
Washing your hair.
That's it. I'll have to be doing
let me see if I can show you my cat. There she is. Yeah.
Why do you guys have such sweet cats? My cat is such a jerk. Does anybody want a cat?
She
Yeah.
attacks other cats. So
You know what?
sorry.
Arlo needs to be put in his place, so that would be perfect.
Your cat is not a jerk. He's misunderstood.
Good. Then I'm gonna give him to you for Christmas.
I have 5, so I think I've got
You had 9 when I started here, and I feel like you don't have enough.
worked my way down to 5. I'm good, thank you.
All right, well, one of you is getting a cat for Christmas. It'll be a surprise.
It's Mandolin.
It's Mindolin. Mindolin, do you have a cat in there?
Yeah, actually I do.
Oh my gosh. It's bring your cat to work
I
day.
was just gonna quickly construct one out of paper.
Oh, Mike, that almost looks like a Turkish van.
Almost.
Almost. All right, well, it was lovely to see you, see your cats. And if you guys need anything, just feel free to reach out to us.
Thank
Happy-
you.
Happy Monday.
See y'all.
Bye,
Bye.
guys.